exactly. And Marilyn brought it up. It's, you know, there are people that are homeless that this is their everyday life, sadly. You know, when you stop and think about it, how thankful we are that we live in a house that's warm. You know, it means an awful lot to be able to be warm. I always say if you're warm and dry and fed, the rest is all a bonus. You know, we're very, very thankful. You're wondering why you got towels today, and we're going to talk about surrender today. And my main focus is going to be on the one who surrendered and in the garden and how tough it must have been. And I think about the surrenders that I've had to do and how really they're pretty minute or minuscule compared to what he had to go through. So from Matthew, I'll read chapter 26, verses 36 through 39. It said, Then Jesus went out with his disciples to a place called the Gethsemane. He said to them, Sit here while I go over here and pray. He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and he found them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. He went away a second time and prayed, My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken unless I drink it, may your will be done. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and he went away once more, and he prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Larry's going to sing her Lead Us in Just As I Am.
Yes, please, if you would.
Warms you up, getting up and down.
And you know that autofill thing that most fuel companies have? Sometimes they don't work, even though it's supposed to be autofill. Oh well. Less things we can control. Huh? Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come. I come.
Again, I want to thank Larry for leading music. I asked Ryan to make sure he muted me when it was time for me to sing. So he said, not a problem, Ed. You all got towels today, and the title of my sermon is Surrender, and when is it time? Now, I was really hoping that Jason would be here, because he's the littlest guy I could think of. And seeing how my wife is here, I'm going to ask her to come up here, okay? And because and we're going to arm wrestle, okay? And you have to cheer for her. You can't cheer for me. You have to cheer for her to not give up. She can't quit, okay? All right? And she probably beat me anyway, so let's, boy, your hands are warm. Boy. I knew it was the reason I married you. Anyway, so 1, 2, 3. Ready? Go! You may sit down. You earned brunch today. That was part of the deal. Thanks for playing along. Don't you like to cheer for the underdog? I mean, isn't it fun to cheer for the underdog and just say, you know, I want that person to win. I want that, unless you're rooting against the Yankees, you know. Right, Mickey? Yep. I know I do. And I don't necessarily I don't care if they win or lose. To me, the score really doesn't matter. But I want them to try as hard as they possibly can and not to give up. You know, we all say, don't quit, you can do it. You know, in movies and sports, we always want the hero to try harder, to fight harder, to go against the odds, and to persevere. I think about the movie Rocky. You know, he's getting the tar beat out of him, and by Apollo Creed. And I mean, it's really bad. And he comes to the corner, his eyes going shut. And once he doesn't say, I quit. He says, cut me, Mick, so that he can see through that slit eye. Often I'll come in and I don't know much about football, but I'll catch part of a football game, and I'll see the score may be a little lopsided, and I don't really care who wins, but I want to see the underdog try as hard as they can and hopefully win. And if they do, fine. If not, but I really want them to try really hard. Truth of the matter is, I just don't want them to give up. And the same, it's not just sports heroes, movie heroes, stuff like that, but I think about people that I've known locally. I think about Larry Russell and how hard that man fought. I think it was over 10 years anyway, at least, that he had cancer. And I prayed that he wouldn't give up, and he didn't. You know, he kept on fighting until finally he couldn't. Doug Moore's another one. And Doug said, if Larry can fight that hard, then so can I. He didn't want to give up. And it was like, yeah, that's what we all root for, people that don't give up. But surrender, the word popped out at me all this past year. Forget COVID and all that other stuff. Surrender just kept popping out at me all year long. Every time I turned around, that word would jump out at me. And it still does. It's continued on to 2022. Now, I don't give up easily. Anybody that knows me say, you know, last night we went to Potterville to get pizza, or I did. Headed up over Orwell Hill and got right below Donnie Russell's barn, and that road was drifted shut. Well, I didn't decide, you know, I tried with the van, I couldn't make it, so I turned around when I got the truck, because nothing was stopping me from Danny's pizza. So anyway, so I wouldn't give up. I was adamant that I was going to try and I was going to make it. And it's just not my DNA to give up. You know, and most of us are that way. We don't want to give up. And I think if there was a description for the word O'Connor, it would be stubborn. Okay, O'Connor equals stubborn. And I come back quite honestly. Now, my grandfather was blind, and I never knew him to have sight, my Grandpa O'Connor. And he was a farmer. He could still distinguish a little bit between light and dark. He could still see a little bit between light and dark. And he didn't want to give up farming. And so when he went to do field work, he would take my uncles with him. And one of them would ride on the old Alice Chalmers WC narrow front end tractor. And they would ride with him to help him with all the controls. The other uncle walked ahead of him dragging a white cloth so that he knew where to drive. I don't know how safe it truly was. He was concerned that whoever was on a tractor may get hurt or something like that, but he was adamant that this was the way. And I don't think it had anything to do with my uncle's safety so much as he was stubborn enough he did not want to give up, that he could not. He didn't want to surrender. He didn't want to throw in the towel. He didn't want to wave it in defeat. And we were cleaning out some stuff in my mother's safe the other day, and I found my dad's wallet. And the year he died of Hodgkin's disease. And he was sick at the time that he bought his fishing license. But he bought his fishing license because he thought he was still going to be able to fish that year. And I've always been, that positive. I've always been never one to give up. But about this time last year, I had a full schedule of work. And it's comforting, if you're self-employed, especially a carpenter, to have a year's worth of work ahead of you. And it was nice. It was really, really good. And it was nice that people wanted to maybe spend time with them, do some home improvements, But in March of last year, everything changed. I wound up with diverticulitis, spent 3-4 days in the hospital. And while I was there, they did a CAT scan, they want to check out, see how things looked and what have you. And it revealed some adverse effects that a lifetime of hard work had on my body. My back isn't very good. My hamstrings are shot. There's a lot of stuff. My knees aren't very good. And so it was about that time that Jill and I talked that maybe it's a time that I should throw in the towel with a career and retire. And she actually said, Ed, now's the time. And I was pleased that she was wise enough to know that. So we talked with our investment guy, and he said, yeah, I plan on you going this year. And it was time. And so I did. Now, it wasn't easy for me because that meant my whole career I told people yes, but now all of a sudden I had to start telling people no. And it wasn't easy. And I can't do your work. Not that I won't, but I can. But I knew it was for the best. All along I thought I would be the guy that would work till he was 80. Not going to quit, work till he was 80. But Josh explained something to me which made a lot of sense. He said, you're worth more to Jill if you stop now because you may be a crippled up old man if you keep working until you're 80. And that made a lot of sense to me. So I surrendered. Surrender is a pretty big word. And if you think about it, how easily do you give up? I mean, we could have given up this morning and said, church is closed, we're done. And you could have said, we're not going to church, it's going to be cold in there. But how easily do you give up? Not many heroes actually throw in the towel. To admit defeat, to face your fate. Can you think of it? To just say, we're done. And how about Jesus? The greatest example we could have, the greatest hero we could have, saying, 3 times he asked, I don't want to do this. Can you take this from me? 3 times. And Jesus surrendered his life. He asked God that his will be done. And that's what I want to focus on, is giving in to God. Surrendering to God. I think of the act of surrendering in 3 parts. Listening, trusting, and obeying. How do we know when God is talking to us, when we're asking to do his will? How well do we listen? I mean, I talk to God a lot, do an awful lot of praying. But I think about how much do I actually listen? And the other thing is would I know God's voice if I heard it? Think about the distractions that we have today. Cell phones, constant companions all the time. Can you get in your vehicle and drive even, from here to there, from home to here without turning on the radio? Music, podcasts, and Jill listens to books on her way to work and back. Television, watching the news, while we eat and what have you. It's a constant distraction. So could we really hear God if he were speaking? Jesus knew his Father's voice. In Scripture, God speaks in seemingly more physical ways when you think about it. He comes to Moses in a burning bush. And in Psalms 27, 3-9, David describes God's voice. And he says, the voice of the Lord is over the waters. The voice of the God of glory thunders. The Lord thunders over the mighty waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is majestic. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. And the Lord breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord strikes with flashes of lightning. The voice of the Lord shakes the desert. The Lord shakes the desert of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. And in his temple all cry glory. I think if God spoke like that, I think we would really, he'd get our attention at least. I think we'd hear that over top of radio, television, whatever else is distracting us. We were up on a hill, and last summer we had a horrendous windstorm. And it just demolished one section of our woods. And I'm thinking, I would have loved to have been there to have heard that, but then I think, this is what it would have been like. I don't think I would have heard God's voice. I would have been scared and probably running back down off the hill. But if God spoke to me like that, I think he'd get my attention. And then at other times, he speaks in a still, small voice, like he did to Elijah. 1 Kings 19:11 through 13. And the Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in fire. After the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Still, small voice. And sometimes I wonder if today, because of all the distractions and everything, if he speaks to us through other people who love us and know us best for us and for our well-being. And to do our part, we have to trust them. Second part of surrender. Trust begins and depends on faith. And Jesus, in his surrender, as hard as it was, trusted God that the outcome was going to be okay. And I wonder, who is in your I trust corner? Who do you go to? Who do you ask? Who can you talk to? Those probably that you have confidence in. I had a guy that I used to do work for back when I was into working. And he would call and ask me questions about work that I was going to do or that he was concerned about. And I would answer as best as my knowledge allowed. And he questioned everything I said. So I have the phone in this ear, and he's asking me, but what about this and what about that? And Jill's in the other ear saying, just hang up. He's obviously not listening. And he didn't, and it was interesting. But because I don't give up, I still work for him, and we made things work. Moving on with my last year's hospital visits, I wound up with that eye infection. And I was 7 weeks on antibiotics. And finally things started to clear up, and I wound up on home health and a PICC line, which Jill did a great job administering. But our home health nurse would come, Robin Duffy would come, and she said, "Ed, these antibiotics take a big toll on your body. And you got to listen to your body, and at some point, you got to listen, and anybody knows what's going to happen." Well, it happened just at the beginning of tree and wreath season, and that's our busiest time of the year, and I was working countless hours and doing all that I could possibly do to get all the work done. And I didn't listen to Robin, until one day I woke up and I could hardly move. She told me, she says, "Your body will tell you, and you will be very exhausted." I couldn't. I just was told. I just couldn't do anything that day. Hardly could get out of bed. I had a wreath class lined up that night. Had a bunch of gals coming in. I always look forward to that. It's a lot of fun. But I had to call and cancel, which was pretty tough for me to do. Anyway, Jill said, "You have to rest today." Laura, our daughter, she texted me and said, "Dad, you need to rest today." Karen said, "How's your broken down body today?" She texted me. She says, "You need to rest today." And I thought about Robin telling me, "You need to rest today." And I did. I threw in a towel, and I rested for a whole day. I never moved, only to get up to go to the bathroom once, I believe, but I never did anything. I didn't move from my chair. I stayed right there the whole time. I obeyed as best I could. And James talks about, who do you want to have trust in? Who do you want to believe in? Who are good people that you would really feel comfortable taking advice from? In James 3:13 through 18, it says, who is wise and understanding among you? Think about that. Who is wise? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. So I think anybody that's wise, you would be able to tell right away. But if you harbor envy, bitter envy, and selfish ambition in your hearts, and do not boast about it or deny the truth, such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, of the devil. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find discord and every evil practice. So would you listen to somebody that had their best interest in mind, or your best interest in mind? But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Peacemakers, though sow in peace, rest a harvest of righteousness. Those are the people that I want to ask questions of, and those are the people that I want to get answers from. I really believe that God spoke to me through those 4 people. Those 4 women that spoke to me because they were concerned about me. They knew. I was pretty stubborn, didn't want to listen. But I obeyed, and I asked God to let me rest and get me better if it was His will. That sometimes might be the hardest part of surrendering to God's will. You know what's best. You know what you need to give up, and you know what you have to give into. But sometimes that medicine is really, really tough to swallow. You know, even a dog knows enough to obey. I mean, most of the time. So why is it hard for us? The Master always knows what's best for us. I'm reading a book about a young man who was struggling. His fiancée just broke up with him because she wanted to marry someone who would probably amount to something, and wasn't sure if this was who that person might be. And I'd like to read a little excerpt from the book. After the tears subsided, this man plumbed the depths of his soul and began to look more inwardly. For the next few weeks, he worked off his inner aching with nightly walks, winding through Temple Terrace empty streets and circling back through the Institute's golf course. Despite the fact that he was a Christian enrolled in a Bible college, the idea of dedicating his life to the ministry frayed his nerves. He had seriously contemplated whether or not he should be preaching for a living. After another late-night stroll, he ended up at the east end of the 18th hole of the Temple Terrace golf course. He stopped, got down on his knees on the wet grass, and humbly he prayed. "Oh God," he cried, "if you want me to serve you, I will." He listened for God's voice, and although he didn't hear anything audibly, he received his answer. Lightning didn't render boulders asunder, no bush burned, there was no columns of smoke or fire, it wasn't loud, and the 18th hole of the Temple golf course certainly wasn't where he expected such an encounter. But the message was clear. He was being enlisted by God to preach. One of 2 things can happen in a time like that, Billy said in reflection. You can reflect and become bitter, or you can let God break you down. And I determined to let God have his way. After that epiphany, Billy no longer questioned who he was, what he should be doing, or if he made the right or the wrong vocational choice. He had finally found his calling, and the rest of his life would be dedicated to Christ. That's Billy Graham. If you ever have a chance, that book is phenomenal. Billy Graham, the man I knew. It's excellent. Here he is, another man on his knees, praying for God's will to be done. He didn't know what the outcome would be, but he was willing to listen, trust, and obey. And look what happened in his life, and how many other thousands, probably millions of lives took place because he listened to God. He trusted and he obeyed. Just as Jesus did in the garden. The Sunday after I listened to these women and trusted and obeyed is one like I'll never forget. I had to go to White Sox that day, and I come to church, and I had to go to White Sox Day, and I knew something felt different. And it was like a veil was lifted off my eyes. It was just like I saw the world totally different. It had rained a little bit, and I drove to White Sox, and the colors, even though it was December, the colors just seemed to jump out at me. I went by Pickering's Winery down here, and the black on the blacktop was like the blackest I'd ever seen. And the pine tree, everything was just, the colors were so much more vibrant. And it was almost like that I was a new person, just like that I was seeing things for the first time and feeling things for the first time. I think that God was showing me what it was like to cast my cares on Him and burdens on Him and actually live for a day. And it was euphoric. It was just, it really felt good, and I just felt at peace. And I'm sad to say that that's only ever happened to me one other time in my entire life. And I know Joan and I talked about this in our EHS class. That, and Jill and I talked about it this morning, that it's hard to put all that stuff aside and trust God and realize that everything's going to be okay and just truly enjoy life for a day. But you know what? It was because I surrendered. It was because I let things happen. And I'm going to plan to do that more often. Just say, you know what? Throw in the towel. I'm just throwing in the towel. I'm done, God. I want you to take over. Many times I've thought, that that's what I should do, but then I took it all back on again. And that's what Jill and I talked about this morning. It's real easy to say you're going to do that. You're going to let everything go for 5 minutes. But I plan to do that more often. My prayers need to end with, if it is your will. When you think about it, you pray for somebody to get better. You pray for this to happen. You pray for better weather. You pray for it to be warmer in the sanctuary. You pray for this and that. But do we ever say, if it's your will, God? We say it every time we say the Lord's Prayer. Thy will be done. I think about what I pray for. Healing for hurt people, traveling mercies, peace in the world, wild weather to spare us. But I don't know if it's God's plan, His pure and perfect will. But I realize that's what I have to seek out. Not what I want, not what I think is best for me, not what I think is best for somebody. But I have to say, if it's your will, Lord, And then I have to listen. And I have to trust. And I have to obey. I think everybody here should have been given a towel. And I want you to think about it and take your towels home and keep your towels. Jill didn't get one, I'm sorry. She bought them, you should get them. Anyway, and I want you to think about it and hang on to them and think, is there something that I need to say to God? I give up. Hang on to it and think about it. I can't do this anymore. I can't handle it. I know when I was working, sometimes things would be overwhelming. And I'd be on my way to CC's and I'd be at the top of Fisner's Hill, and God forbid if Mickey were listening, but I may stop at the top of Fisner's Hill where no one is around and get out of the truck and say, and yell at the top of my lungs, I can't do this anymore. God, you've got to help me with this. And He did. But 5 minutes later, I took it all back on again. But I knew that I had to give up something and keep giving it up. So what I want you to do is, with your towels, just plan on it and think about it and keep it around and give up with me and start to enjoy life and realize how much more vibrant things can be and how pretty things can be and how good life can be. Karen gave us, I don't know how many years ago, a piece of thread, and we're supposed to hang on to that and pray for somebody when we had that thread. Mine still is tied where I keep my work clothes, and I pray for Brian Alderson every day when I get the clothes out of my work area. So when you see your towel, think about, what do I want to give up? God, what do I need to give up so that I can truly live? Billy Graham did. Look what God had in store for him when you think about it. Jesus did. His Father didn't let him down. Take your towel and cry, if you must. Cry out to God and say, I really need you. Now, it says on the box that these are good for 50 washes. So they're going to last a long, long time, you know. And I hope you wear it out and surrender. And I hope you wear it out seeking God's will. We could go to prayer with me, please. Heavenly Father, when we think about surrendering and giving up, we know that it's tough. We have the greatest example in the world. We have your son, who said, if it's your will, 3 times he asked that it not happen to him. But he knew that it had to. When we think about how well it turned out, we're thankful, Lord, that he listened to you and he decided that he would surrender and do your will. Lord, as hard as it is for us, Lord, we know that we need to. We know that it's important to. And that you want us to glimpse of what life could truly be like if we did. Lord, it's okay to throw in the towel, and it's okay for us to, we need to realize that it's okay for that to happen so that we can say, yeah, we've done all we can do. Help us to find people that we can listen to, that we can trust, and that we can obey. And if we seek your words, Lord, and we seek your voice, let us be able to hear it through all the distractions that there are. But if it is through another person, if it's through a song, if it's through whatever, Lord, help us to realize that it's what's best for us. Help us to know your voice when we hear it. Lord, we're thankful that even though it's cold, that we decided it was okay to come and worship, and that's pretty important, Lord. Thankful for heat and warmth and the change of the seasons. And Lord, we think about those that aren't as fortunate as us to have a home to go to, that may be a cardboard box or under a bridge somewhere. And Lord, we're thankful, Lord, that we have the kind of life that we can enjoy those treasures. Lord, we want to think about Pastor Karen and Judy as they're headed to the ECO National Gathering, that they may be renewed, refreshed, and warm, and that they may have a enlightened time, that they may feel renewed and energized by that experience, and bring that back to us when they come back. Lord, we think about those that are ailing, and Lord, if it is your will, that they continue to get better. Lord, we think about those that are dying, and when it is your will, that their time will come, and those that care for those that are in that position, give them strength, give them peace, give them courage. Lord, we're thankful that you have set a super example for us, that you sent your son that knew what it was like to go through that. When he fell to his knees and asked, your will be done. Lord, he also gave us a prayer that was really, very important. And it goes, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever.
Would you stand again, please? I surrender all. All to Jesus I surrender.
You may have a seat while Mervyn plays the postal. Go in peace, go get warm. Did I hear cars starting from remote start? I'm not sure. Go in peace, go and stay warm and have a great week. And don't be afraid to surrender and give up. It's not a bad thing. Thank you.